So there's actually a British-based political channel that does debates, right? It is all right, North Countryman. It is called Byline TV, which is a subset of Byline Times, run by Peter Jukes, the king of the shitlibs. That's not. He's not a shitlib. He's like I think that the work he does is really good, but he does get incredibly triggered by leftoids. And he does seem to think that everyone who disagrees with him is being paid off by the Russian state, kind of Paul Mason style. And there's a debate. They've managed to get a debate between a TikToker called Supertansky, who is like a liberal, like a left liberal type person. Like she voted Corbyn. She's got like 100,000 followers on Twitter, 700 followers on TikTok. So she just like people on Twitter hate her for getting into arguments with leftoids, but I mean, I think her heart's in the right place, even if she is a bit of a liberal with her takes. But whatever. It's hosted by Marina Purkis, who's very much a liberal. And then it's those two, even though Purkis is supposed to be a moderator, apparently she's also getting involved in the debate anyway, debating Dan Hodges from the Daily Mail, who's an ex-Labour member who then became a Daily Mail journalist, because I'm assuming because it paid a lot more. Either way, this is a debate about, apparently, just about sticking it to the right-wing press, which I'm sure a liberal is going to be incredibly well-suited to be able to be critiquing in a substantive manner. So anyway, we are going to watch that and critique it, and let's go.
So let's get straight into it. Papers like yours, they absolutely must have a Tory government in power. And if you're going to pretend that that isn't the case, then I think that's disingenuous.
Okay. The argument seems to be because Keir Starmer was not found guilty by the police, that the scrutiny of Keir Starmer over that was not legitimate, right?
Where's the apology then?
Did the editors...
I'm sure they are really well and truly going to dig into the actual incentive structure that makes papers like the Daily Mail want to support the Conservative government. But we'll see. TikToker
at the Mail not believe that it was in the public's interest to ask serious questions of Boris Johnson regarding his trip with Evgeny Lebedev off the record.
Where was the feature of that? Because that's a huge story.
His 10 front pages is for Currygate, so where was the balance?
Well, firstly, well...
I mean, if you're going to have a guest on, at least edit it so... No, don't edit the start of it so that you're trying to make him look like an idiot. I mean, come on, at least have some good faith. I hate Dan Hodges, obviously, but come on.
I mean, what do we want? Do we want a free media?
How's that free?
Heard of conflict of interest done? This is the thing.
Never heard the phrase.
No. I cannot doubt that sometimes the Daily Mail reports truth. My goodness,
Right.
of course they do. But you do not. You are evading the point that
I'm not
so
evading the
often
point. I'm tackling the point head on.
the Daily Mail does not report fact. Welcome to The Table, a new debate
Yeah, this music makes me want to engage in political discourse.
show from Byline TV, where we'll be having the conversations that matter with people we might not always agree with. This isn't just any talk show, though. At The Table, there's no hiding behind soundbites or slogans. We are going straight to the heart of the issues, and we'll be exploring the philosophical and cultural underpinnings behind our positions. Tonight, we'll be talking about the British media and the role it plays in our politics. Is the revolving door between our government and our press a cause for concern? And is it right that the majority of our national newspapers, nearly 70%, are owned by a tiny handful of non-dom billionaires? And who are these billionaires? Well, there's Viscount Rothermere, owner of the Daily Mail and the Metro. Rupert Murdoch owns The Sun and The Times. He also owns Talk TV parent company News UK. There's Frederick Bartley, who owns The Telegraph. And who can forget Evgeny Lebedev, son of sanctioned Russian oligarch and former KGB agent Alexander Lebedev, who owns the London Evening Standard. Between these four men, a huge amount of influence is held over the UK electorate, despite none of them having ever faced a vote themselves. So...
Okay, so let's get at the start of it, understanding that a small cadre of people control huge amounts of... have I got the sound too low? I might have done. Let me try and turn up the sound. It is obviously bad that, 4 people control huge amounts of the press coverage in this country, right? But The question is, are you going to frame it as a corrupted incentive structure in which through profit seeking, because, to be able to have this kind of large platform, at least through, the printing press, you're going to have the infrastructure with which to do that, and the quest for profit amongst these companies makes them want to pursue certain political lines, and want to be able to create new power vacuums that continue to funnel power upwards, right? Or is it because the bad people are in charge, and if you replace the bad people with good people, things will be better? That's the conversation we need to be having, really.
Is drastic action needed? What can we do to restore some of the balance in our media? And does it really matter who owns the press? Well, joining me at the table tonight to answer exactly that are viral social media commentator Super Tansky and political commentator for the Mail on Sunday, Dan Hodges. So let's get straight into it. Dan, you work for the Mail on Sunday, so this is Rothermere's paper. What do you think? Is it right that newspaper owners who are foreign or non-domiciled, such as Rothermere, should have so much influence over an electorate?
Who cares how foreign they are? Who cares their taxation? What actually matters is, again, as I said, the incentive structure behind what underpins what they do, right? You could have a British billionaire in charge who pays all of his taxes, right? And he would still want to put a Conservative government in charge because that is within his material interest to do so.
Well, I mean, I would have to start off by challenging your premise that in some way the electorate are being manipulated by these evil media barons. I mean, I think we have in Britain, fortunately, we have one of the most diverse medias in the world. I think we have...
Are you on drugs, Dan? Diverse media, we literally have the most poisonous single issue press in the world, where even the kind of media establishments that you would with even a small amount of sympathy for the left, right? So you have the Mirror, you have the Guardian, and to a lesser extent the Indie, right? Even though the Indie's probably gone a little bit more kind of centrist nowadays, so literally just kind of the Guardian and the Mirror, both of whom continue to have complete kind of falsehood attack lines on Jeremy Corbyn throughout his tenure as Labour leader, right? And who have continuously put out opinion pieces about how things like nationalisation have been bad, and now they're kind of they're changing tack on as soon as the spectre of Corbynism is gone. And the rest of the kind of press landscape is the most horrendously toxic circle jerk of people who are just happy to lick the boot of corporate capital for money. Literally, the entire of we have the work. Our media is even worse than the US, by a country mile. It's not even close at this point. How poisonous, and especially when you look at something like, I don't know, the private school system is uniquely toxic as well here. And the kind of the class strata that's kind of developed within that throughout the history of the UK. 51% of journalists in our country are people who've come out of the private school system. So they've already come out of an incredibly kind of toxic in-group of people who have, pretty fucking horrendous view of things like, I don't know, the working class, or, people outside of their own little posh private school kids bubble, right? How on earth Dan Hodges can even come on here and say that we have, some kind of huge kind of plethora of viewpoints represented in our media when we just have neoliberalism red and neoliberalism blue at this point, really? How far afield do you have to go to find political opinions outside of neoliberalism, apart from the odd Aditya Chakraborty column in The Guardian and YouTube? That's it. That's literally it.
Most effective medias in the world, and fortunately we have
the thing is, Clive, is that Byline are going to happy to platform Paul Mason because both Paul Mason and Peter Jukes are as Russia-brained as each other, right? Both of them think that literally anybody who disagrees with them is some kind of person paid off by the Kremlin.
We have a media which, I think especially now...
I think Tansky's just general kind of anti-Tory. She voted for Corbyn, I believe, in both general elections, and also I think in one of the leadership elections as well, so... Yeah, literally it's Novara Media, and of course the great home of left-order media coverage in the UK, which is No Justice MTG. So yeah, and when you think about that, when you realise we have the monopoly on Twitch streamers, yeah, you see, is it really as one-sided as you think?
At the moment, in the sort of in the midst of our sort of cancel culture and trigger warning world, we have a media that is prepared to challenge consensus, is to the fury
The
of...
media are the consensus. The media have been the consensus forever. You can actually see there's a really interesting graph that will show you that people's worry about immigration as an issue, when polled, directly correlates to the amount of media coverage that it's given, right? The idea that the media just are somehow driving some they're just kind of challenging some kind of consensus rather than deliberately trying to create a consensus themselves through manufactured consent. Like, again, I'm sure, like, Dan essentially lives in the position. We all remember the Chomsky interview with Andrew Marr, right? Like, where Andrew Marr kind of claims that he's not being self-censored, or he's not self-censoring when working for the BBC or working for some other publication or whatever, something like that. And he's like, well, no, you're not self-censoring. I'm sure that you believe everything that you think that you believe you do. But if you didn't hold the beliefs that you hold right now, you wouldn't be sitting in the chair. You wouldn't be in this position. The reason that they've hired you into this position is because you already agree with that worldview. And you're not going to say things that challenge the media orthodoxy of the time, right? That's the reason why they put you in that position. Like, you may think that your points of view probably are entirely informed by your own worldview and ideology. But it's the fact that your ideology lines up with theirs that has put you into the powerful position within the journalism sphere that you currently inhabit.
Occasionally prepared to challenge liberal consensus, and is prepared to upset people on occasion, and I think that's the way it should be.
But it's the selection of news and it's the narrative that is spun. So, for example, let's take Partygate. Again, your paper, Dan, we had, I think, 10 plus front pages dedicated.
Of course, the thing they're going to go for is the thing that literally doesn't fucking matter. And I don't care about Partygate. I mean, obviously, I'm sure plenty of Byline TV viewers, they're all continually incensed about Partygate rather than, I don't know, coverage of crony contracts or I don't know, coverage of, like, I mean, issue very personal to home, things like their coverage of things like transphobia, which we will get onto later because there's going to be plenty of misinformation about that, or the coverage of the migrant crisis, anything about this, coverage of climate change, new coverage of, like, the benefit system, right? Things that actually materially affect people. Whether or not Boris Johnson had some fucking cake, I just do not care about.
To what transpired to be a perfectly legal curry and beer.
Currygate.
Kiss off 10 plus front pages. Fine. If you want to be that diligent and if you want to drill into and investigate a story, fine. But can you see where it doesn't feel balanced and it doesn't feel like you're reporting the news when there are what some might call bombshell stories that fail to get a...
Just talk about them lying. You don't have to say you don't report the things that we want you to report. Just talk about the fact that they continually publish misinformation across the spectrum as well. Guardian just as much to blame.
Sniff of a story, such as, for example, our own PM, Boris Johnson, who left a NATO meeting on the Russian poisonings in Salisbury, on British soil, to go and party and stay with Evgeny Lebedev, who is the son, and also met with his father. He is the son of Alexander Lebedev, a sanctioned former KGB agent for Putin.
This is a reasonable line of attack, right? I'm glad they're getting around to more things like, you know, Boris Johnson being essentially neglecting his duties as Prime Minister and compromising national security. Like, this is probably a better line of questioning.
Doesn't seem to make any front pages, and yet 10 plus dedicated to Keir Starmer. So can you see why people think
actually, Goddotter, speaking of things like, you know, the private water industry, it's funny, right? It's funny, right, that now all the liberal media journalist types and, you know, publications, they're all on board with criticising the privatisation of water. They're all on board with critiquing the privatisation of energy. They're all on board with critiquing the privatisation of the rail network. As soon as the threat of Corbynism has passed, as soon as no politician is actually wanting to do it, right? As soon as no one's advocating for it in the political sphere, you know, outside of, you know, people they would term cranks, suddenly, and now having this cost of living crisis, suddenly it's all the news. Or suddenly we have to talk about the issue with United Utilities and, you know, Severn Trent that have been going on for, you know, a decade at this point, multiple decades, right? And suddenly they feel like they want to go on about it. And suddenly it's like Dan Hodges himself, actually, he's a Daily Mail journalist. Even he was talking about how Keir Starmer should be talking about nationalisation, right? Saying, well, I'm pragmatic, I'm not ideological about this. Well, hang on a minute. No, what you are is stupid. Like, leftists, we understand the corrupting incentives of the system and why privatization doesn't work. And we were telling you for ages that this would happen and has been happening because we understand the fact that the profit motive cannot be fit into these things such as natural monopolies because of the fact that the marketization of these sectors just doesn't work. It never has worked because of the actual way in which these systems work, because of the nature of things like inelastic demand and inelastic markets in general, right? But these people are so blinkered and lib-brained about this shit that they only start looking at the issues once everything's fucked. Right? Rather than someone telling you this is going to happen because of these reasons, because of this incentive structure, they go, no, it's fine. And then as soon as everything breaks, like, oh my god, how have you got to this position where everything's broken? It's because you didn't fucking listen to us. You didn't listen to us when we were telling you about the fact these things would fail and have done.
Manipulation there going on. There's a selection of what we will tell and what we won't tell.
Yeah, I can see that, but that's because it's frequently presented in exactly the way that you presented it. So we had as we had at the beginning, we had we've got the Sun and we've got the Daily Mail, and it shows the British media is biased. We do have the Sun and the Daily Mail. We also have the Mirror. We also have the Guardian. We also have the Observer. We also have the Independent. We obviously have the BBC, all of which are either left.
So the BBC, which is the administration that again published like literal fucking memes about Corbyn with like photoshopped Russian hats, right? Having him as fucking Voldemort on the back of Professor Quirrell's head, and also had Rishi Sunak that they depicted him as a fucking superhero, and you're trying to tell us that the BBC is left wing? What fucking universe do you live in, Dan? And also the Independent is centrist, and the Guardian also, and the Guardian and the Mirror is the only paper that had more positive coverage of Corbyn than negative, and then more neutral than both of those combined. Even the Guardian was more negative about Corbyn than they were positive in their coverage, as has been shown it through analysis of these things by independent research by the London School of Economics, right? So not some captured institution that is trying to bring about the vanguard party and communism. The London School of Economics has told you and has done actual research, empirical research, showing that the entirety of the British press, apart from the Mirror specifically, was biased against Corbyn. Like, the BBC, the ones who are literally posting transphobic lies, explicitly lying in their coverage about trans issues, reporting studies with no proper, actual empirical rigor involved in them at all, and publishing them completely unquestioning with ridiculous titles, right? He probably thinks that the BBC are left-wing because they have Frankie Boyle on Mock the Week, or did have Frankie Boyle on Mock the Week. That's probably his level. It's just like, well, suddenly they said some things that were nice about black people. That means that they're left-wing, right? What kind of universe must you inhabit to think that thinks that there's somehow some kind of counter-narrative to the huge right-wing press bias, and not just in the actual right-wing press, but also within the nominally left-wing press as well. When you look at places like the Guardian, who are again just liberals. They're all just liberals at the end of the day. All just liberals.
Or liberal leading outlets with significant influence.
The funding, though, Dan. The issue is the funding, the exceptional amount of money that goes into those big papers you've mentioned. When you look at the Mirror, they do not have the same level of funding and the same level of reach. And in regard to things like Currygate, it was overt bias. You can't deny that was overt bias. And also the issue of democracy comes into that, in the sense that there's a lot of speculation that possibly...
the Tories just literally put one of their ex-communications directors, I think it was, or they might have been in the running to be appointed to be the Director General of the BBC, right? Come on.
That influenced a further police investigation into Keir Starmer. And when you look at how close Johnson is with that particular paper, then you can see that, there's the option that there could have been influence to, promote a further investigation of someone that was ultimately innocent. I don't see how that can be seen as democratic.
Okay,
it looked like Johnson was influencing, to get rid of a political opponent.
I just get incredibly frustrated that we never have any leftist intrusion into any of these kind of discussions. Sometimes they'll have Ash Sarkar or Owen Jones. And don't get me wrong, I love Ash Sarkar and Owen Jones, but come on, can we at least have more representation to just the same two people again and again?
The reality is, anyone watching this programme is free to walk out of the house now and buy it.
Actually, a lot of conservatives aren't even liberals. I mean, there are plenty of neoliberals, but there are actually quite a lot of kind of far right kind of libertarian types, far either libertarian or fascist sympathisers amongst our press as well.
The newspaper they want. They can buy the Mirror, they can buy the Guardian, they can buy the Observer, they can look at the Independent online, they can buy the Eye, they can switch on and listen to the BBC, they can watch programmes like this. There's never been a time in British history where we haven't had such a diverse media. Now, on the specifics, because obviously I get this one a lot, on the specifics of Partygate and Beergate, you're absolutely right. A lot of attention was focused on Beergate. I think you said 10 headlines.
Can we ask just why was that? What was the editorial steer there?
It wasn't an editorial steer. It was because we, on the Mail, unlike certain other outlets, we actually do believe in balance. And equally, let's look at the issue that actually...
The Daily Mail is literally blacklisted as a source by Wikipedia for its consistent use of fabrication. Like, come on, Dan.
Actually brought him down, which was... I've forgotten his name now. The Pincher affair. It was the Sun newspaper. It was the Sun newspaper, one of the newspapers that you identified as being biased in relation to this. The Sun newspaper that actually broke that story.
That's, Dan, I think we can all agree that's because it became inconvenient to continue backing Boris Johnson. So if you think that a person or a Prime Minister has serious... Keir Starmer, you said he had serious questions to answer about Currygate.
Yeah.
And you talked about balance.
Well, the problem is that the discussion here is about whether or not the press is biased, rather than what causes the press to be biased, what engenders these narratives amongst kind of the journalist class. And I think that's a more interesting conversation to have. Like the fact that Dan Hodges can sit here and try and claim that there is no press bias. I mean, obviously that's just nonsense. But like, it is and it's interesting that even Marina Purkiss here can understand that it just became a point at which the Conservatives' future electoral chances were so bad that it was actually within the press's interests to try and get Boris Johnson ousted, because he was so universally disliked by the public and he would cost them the next election 100%. And also because the attack lines from the Labour Party were also just as bad. They continually tried to claim that the real issues with Partygate were because of the crony contracts, were because of Boris Johnson as a figurehead, rather than with the Conservative Party as a political force.
Did the editors at the Mail...
Well, like, the Times is actually the worst, right? Because the thing is with the Daily Mail and the Sun, because they're tabloids, there's like this air of illegitimacy about it. Like, you kind of expect them to be sensationalist in the way that they publish things. But the Times is just as ideologically captured, if not more so. But the fact that it's the Times and it's so kind of historically prestige, and the fact that it hires slightly more upmarket journalists, even though they really aren't, they're just as ideologically captured as the rest of the right-wing press. The Times is actually the absolute dirt worst for this. And you can look at, if you take it something, for example, their coverage of transgender issues in a microcosm is like a case study, and you look at the kind of people that they publish and the kind of things that they publish, it's actually more insidious. That it's not just, ooh, we hate the transes. It's almost this kind of crypto-fascist exterminationist rhetoric about trying to legislate us out of existence, rather than just, oh, look at the scary trannies that you get out of the Sun and the Daily Mail, right? It's far more insidious in the Times than it is in any of those publications. And the fact that David Aronovich can still claim that he's not ideologically captured at this point, whilst working at the Times, is quite astounding to me.
Not believe that it was in the public's interest to ask serious questions of Boris Johnson regarding his trip to stay with Evgeny Lebedev, off the record.
This is record. He got rid of his security detail.
Why was this not of major concern? This is some might say this is almost a traitorous act.
It's a national security risk. Where was the feature of that? Because that's a huge story.
Oh, 100%. Wasn't the Times backing Douglas Murray as well? The guy who is literally a crypto-fascist, right? This guy talks about the war on the West and like Western values and encroachment into the West by, outside forces. This is explicitly like this Nazi rhetoric. This shit is, right? Like he says it in plenty of words, but you could probably kind of condense it all down to 14 words by the end of it.
If 10 front pages is for Currygate, surely for balance, we're looking at 20 front pages for Boris Johnson's meeting. So where was the balance?
Well, firstly, again, we're talking about balance. Okay, so the argument is that the argument seems to be because Keir Starmer was not found guilty by the police of breaking COVID laws, that the scrutiny of Keir Starmer over that was not legitimate. Right, that seems to be the argument.
Where's the apology? No,
actually, I'm not sure.
I mean, the scrutiny was legit, but that's not what they're saying here, actually. I can't believe I'm going to be backing up Perkis and Tansky here, but like they're 100% correct, and it's nothing to do with the level of scrutiny. It's the level of coverage, right? It was absolutely fine for Keir Starmer to be investigated by the police. In fact, good for him to be investigated by the police. All politicians should be held to account, and they shouldn't be allowed to, flout laws that were essentially created by the political class within the Commons, right? It was absolutely good for him to be investigated, and at the end of the day, it was good for Labour that he got investigated too, because it completely lionised his claims about the fact that his was a legitimate work meeting. Which, as much as I hate Keith, I do have to actually back him up here and say that Beergate was entirely fabricated. I mean, it was fucking the son of James Dellingpole, right? The editor for Breitbart, who leaked the initial images. So, like, come on. If anything was a deliberate kind of rightoid smear campaign, this was. But the fact that it was investigated by the police and it was put under scrutiny, that's not the issue. It's the level of coverage between one beer and a curry during a work meeting whilst out canvassing during the third lockdown against people having continuous parties and alcoholic drunkenness throughout the initial first, much harder lockdown, right? So these are clearly not comparable and do not deserve comparable coverage.
I'm not saying that.
No, wait,
I'm not saying that, actually.
But we all did on
So
that.
the police didn't
Exactly. So we're not exactly. So exactly. So we
Dan,
cannot, can we?
Your claim
We
of
cannot
balance,
use.
your claim of balance is preposterous then, because if you think there
Why
are
is it preposterous?
because 10 front pages dedicated to.
I don't know why they I mean, hopefully we'll see a bit more, but I don't know why they invited Tansky to this debate, because it seems like it's just Marina Perkis doing the arguing, whilst ostensibly there to be a moderator.
If you think that, if the people at Daily Mail think 10 front pages is warranted for investigating Currygate and there are serious questions to answer, and you said today that it's about balance, then balance would have been at least 10 front pages and serious questions to Boris Johnson. And where were they? Where were they?
Where were the
Well,
10 front
I don't know why they're trying to kind of equate coverage of the Lebedev scandal with coverage of Beergate. These are two separate, different issues. Obviously, they're right in saying that it warrants more coverage, but why don't you just talk about actual Partygate?
in relation to Partygate?
No, in relation to Boris Johnson foregoing his security detail and off the record flying from a NATO meeting about Russian poisonings on British soil to go and party and stay with Lebedev and Lebedev Jr.
Let me explain that. When that incident occurred and that incident was reported, we reported it as well. But that was years ago. That was an old story. Now, the point at which...
It's not an old story, Dan. I'm sorry, but you're being misleading here.
In what way is it not an old story? All right.
I mean, and they're also right. It's even if the story happened a long time ago, right? Even if that story happened a while ago, the fact that it compromises him in his position when we are dealing with the Russo-Ukraine war, that's why it's relevant now, considering the situation in Ukraine.
Perhaps when it was old, there was no detail
On
around
what
it.
date?
Now we have detail. And are you not an investigative newspaper? Why aren't you asking the questions? Because it wasn't of interest.
And also Lubov. I mean, you look at the Defence Secretary's, former Defence Secretary to Putin's wife, and her excessive donations even after Russia invaded Ukraine. Why am I not seeing this on the front of the Daily Mail?
Let me say. Firstly, in relation to it being an old story, what was the date when it was first revealed Boris Johnson had made that visit? When was it first reported? Who first reported it?
I'd imagine it would have been not too far after the Salisbury poisonings.
Right, so what date was that?
Not off the top of my head, I've got no idea. What relevance is that? The fact is that we have more information now.
It's the definition. I was going to come on to that. We're talking about the definition of an old story.
It takes time for this to come out, though, doesn't it, if no one reports it?
We're talking several years ago, right? Now, it was first reported several years ago. We reported it, all newspaper outlets reported it several years ago. The news agenda moves on, the political agenda moves on. That's not just for us, that's for all other stories. Well, how many stories has The Guardian splashed on?
I'm sorry, Dan. You splashed the Keir Starmer picture of him having a beer weeks ago, and then it was rehashed and got back onto the front pages when it was because you needed the narrative. Let's believe Partygate as is, and let's assume that everyone things were covered adequately, right? My concern is that this claim of balance is completely false, because when there are matters that are far more significant than Partygate, for example, the complete. Well, we talked about the Russian trip. We've talked about the financing of his flat. We've talked about offering his wife or then mistress a job. These are things that if you were really balanced as a paper, you would report on in the same way, with the same scrutiny, and you don't. And that absence, that silence is deafening.
Well, then why do people not know about it generally? Why is that not water cooler talk? Because people...
No, that's a good question.
I think a bigger discussion about things like Daily Mail bias. If we want to talk about media narratives and the way in which narratives are constructed by the media apparatus, talking about things like the coverage of how benefits were distributed during the austerity regime of David Cameron and George Osborne, and how the Daily Mail had reported so negatively about benefit claimants during the new Labour era, despite the fact unemployment not being that high really under new Labour era. The unemployment really increased under Cameron and George Osborne. And the way in which that narrative was used by the government specifically to justify benefit sanctions, fit for work schemes, ATOS miracles, all that shit, right? So the narrative that was driven by the right-wing press, including the Daily Mail, led to a policy then used by the government to try and generate popular support that killed people. Tens of thousands of people, excess deaths, due to the austerity programs of the Cameron and Osborne government. And that's a direct result about right-wing press narratives around the benefit scheme, right? Around about benefit claimants, right? So, am I saying the Daily Mail killed people? Yes, I am. That's exactly what I'm saying. Like, oh, you're being too harsh. I'm sorry, mate. Like, it's just material analysis. Get real. Like, this, if you do a thing, and then the result of that thing is people dies, then how else am I supposed to describe that?
This comes back to the broader issue. It's because it doesn't fit the narrative. So if we report a story in relation to Boris, like the Abbott Party, we serialised in the Mail the book which had these revelations about Carrie and the job and all the stuff that everybody subsequently said everybody tried to cover up, because it doesn't fit the narrative. So no one is going to turn around. You are not going to.
You decide who fits the narrative.
You decide the narrative.
I'm sorry. Did
you directly.
Did Keir Starmer buying a donkey sanctuary for his mother fit any narrative? No.
Yes,
and yet you took it upon yourselves to make a huge story out of it.
What a bastard, buying a donkey sanctuary.
But the House of Commons Commissioner it was literally revealed this week that Keir Starmer at the time.
Why can't we talk about the donkey? Forget
How long ago did that happen, Dan? How long ago did that happen? Why is that not an old story?
We reported that story when he became Labour leader. We obviously didn't report it before.
We need to move on. My summary is that papers like yours, they absolutely must have a Tory government in power, right?
This is a very unbiased summary, but
I said it. It's my own thoughts, and therefore that's why.
Yeah, the reason why, why do they want a Tory government in power? Why is it that they manufacture these narratives? Why is it they manufacture consent? It's because they want to have lower taxes. They want to have less regulation. They want to be able to, they want to be able to take advantage of, sweetheart deals with the government, right? And this is why I think, like, the actual real scandal was the press bungs that were revealed in the House of Lords, right? About Boris Johnson explicitly having, and his his campaign team and people in his inner circle having explicit lines to the press departments of these media organisations to be able to leak stories. That's the real, like, kind of actual scandal regarding the media and Boris Johnson, not whether or not that they reported on Beergate or a donkey sanctuary fairly.
Everything in terms of the stories that they pushed to maintain a Tory government. If they had continued their support for Boris Johnson when it became clear that he could not even have the support of the country anymore, they would have lost the next election outright. So they had to change the horse they were backing. At that point, and only at that point, did they shift gears and go, no more Johnson, we'll start breaking some stories on him, and we'll start to back Liz Truss. And if you're going to pretend that isn't the case, then I think that's disingenuous.
Okay, so a couple of things. If that, I mean, again, that's a popular thesis. If that's the case, why did the Sun back Tony Blair?
Because Tony Blair got into bed with Rupert Murdoch, had a very close relationship,
Fair point.
became the godfather to one of his kids, and gave him promises and reassurances that Murdoch wanted to hear, and that's the only reason. And in fact, thank you.
Yes, it was definitely all about. I mean, obviously, they're right in claiming that they had a close relationship, and it is very true that he's a godfather to one of Murdoch's granddaughters. Why though? What policies were coming from the Labour government that got him the sweetheart deal with Murdoch? It wasn't neoliberalism. Right? Was it the maintaining of a market economy? Was it the understanding that he would change from kind of John Smith's kind of like social democratic perspective to an entirely third way neoliberal one under Blair? Right? Was it him basically destroying the history of the Labour Party by completely taking away their roots and betraying the trade unions? Right? Is that a thing that Blair did with the backing of the Murdoch press? 100%, right? Blair literally he completely rewrote the rulebook, including getting rid of Clause 4, right? That's not just a euphemism, he's saying get rid of the rulebook. He literally tried to remove parts of the actual Labour kind of, not manifesto, but you know what I mean. Constitution, right? That's why Murdoch backed Blair. The fact that Dan Hodges and the fact the whole panel here are so, again, ideologically, I guess to the right of me, Dan Hodges firmly to the right, and those two kind of centrists, really, centrist liberals, right? I guess Tansky is a little bit more left, people like Perkis. But the fact that they can't even criticise Blair from an economic standpoint about how he fundamentally made sure that nothing changed, you know, on a macroeconomic scale post Thatcher, and why that meant that he got support of the Murdoch press. It's just unreal to me.
For example, Dan, because it shows you how it is our newspapers that choose our next Prime Minister, our newspaper owners, and not the electorate.
I agree with that,
I
yeah.
contest that, but your initial point was that come hell or high water, the newspapers have to ensure there is a Tory government. Right, that wasn't a Tory government, was it? That was a Labour government.
Was it though, Dan? Was it really a Labour government?
Because it suited them, because John Major was pro-EU.
Okay, but that's a different argument.
Oh God, no! They think that it's Brexit. They think that it's They think that it's because of John Major being pro-EU and because he's now anti-Brexit. Oh my God, no! I'm gonna have a fucking aneurysm. No, it's because Tony Blair was a fucking neoliberal. That's why. That's explicitly why. It's nothing to do with the European Union. For the love of God, I'm gonna have an aneurysm.
You're avoiding
but again, this is again. I'm sorry to repeat myself. Comes back to narrative. You specifically said the job of the Conservative newspaper is to ensure, come what may.
No, I didn't say come what may. Moving on.
Well, you did.
Next question. Is it right? So let's go back to the accountability of newspapers.
God, I can't believe it was an open goal for you to just say, look, this is why Labour drifted so far away from their core values and became a neoliberal party, and that's how far right they had to move to get the backing of the press to be able to win an election, right? And you can see the actual point of view of the press to try and undermine Labour values, so much so to make sure that there was no alternative to neoliberalism. That's the real point of this issue, and the fact that both of them couldn't even make that response out to making that Brexit shows that completely fucking incapable these people are. Oh my God, I mean, specifically Marina Perkins. Obviously, like, Tansky didn't really have much input there, but come on, it's so simple. It's so simple to understand why the Murdoch press backed Blair during the Blair years, and all of these people are just so right wing. They just don't get it. They just don't get it. It's red team versus blue team. That's all that matters. There's no ideology outside of this. No underlying political philosophy that has changed at all that makes any difference as far as the actual effective utility of the governing party is. It's all just red team versus blue team in these people's worlds, both Dan's and also his debate opponents here.
Is it right that there's actually it feels like no accountability for the lies told in the press? So from the Mail alone,
Right,
from the Mail alone, just stick with me,
because
these are all, please feel free to argue. From the Mail alone, we have seen a sometimes daily deluge of lies, which feels like they're spreading division and hatred. There's proof, I'll just bear with me.
Very good.
We saw, for example, loads of hatred aimed towards migrants, which culminated, some may argue, in Brexit. Just give you a few examples from your paper. So,
talking about Brexit again, please help. Now, it's not to do with Brexit. The reason why there's an anti-immigration narrative is explicitly to try and form a narrative of workers against foreign workers, right? It's all about, they took our jobs narrative. It's all about creating a working class division amongst people based upon their race, to be able to make sure that there is no working class unity against the bourgeois. That is why they do it. It's not because they were explicitly trying to make Brexit happen. God, I'm just... Oh, dear Lord. You want to talk about the lies told about Corbyn? Yeah, well, 100%.
Turkey's membership of the EU.
Across the entirety of the press. And not just the right-wing press, also the nominally left-wing quote-unquote press, like the Mirror and the Guardian.
Apparently talks were starting in June 2016. Never happened. Also, we were told millions of Bulgarians and Romanians were coming over. I quote, all the planes and buses were full and sold out. This actually was investigated. There was a complaint upheld. IPSO, who is the regulator, absolutely useless. And by the way, this is interesting. IPSO is the independent press standard organisation. So the regulator. Paul Dacre is in charge of the editor's code of practice for IPSO. So there you go. Just put that in your back pocket, people, right? So IPSO took 7 months in particular to...
See, it's just that the bad people are in charge. No systemic or material analysis of anything that's going on. Just, well, have you not? Well, of course things are going to go on when you have the bad people in charge. And then suddenly people can dismiss your point of view as saying, well, you just think that the bad people are evil because they disagree with you. You can't just claim that there's a cabal. That's a nonsense conspiracy theory. True, it is a conspiracy theory to say that things are bad because the bad people are in charge. If you don't engage in literally any material analysis of the incentive structures at play to create the system as it exists. I'm sorry, this is why you just cannot have liberals debating with right-wingers, because they just don't know. They just don't know.
investigate that particular claim, millions of Bulgarians and Romanians, but eventually it was found that they had broken the editor's code of practice, but they refused to publish their findings and refused to tell the Daily Mail, to tell the public they had broken the editor's code of practice. Third example, and then you can tell me everything you're thinking about this. Even Edge, Microsoft's internet browser, began to run notices on the Daily Mail website in 2019, warning the website generally fails to maintain basic standards of accuracy and accountability. So is it just the Wild West out there?
I think you'll secretly find that Bill Gates is woke and is trying to undermine people who disagree with him. I mean, he is trying to undermine people who disagree with him, but he's trying to undermine socialists.
Well, I mean, let's just use. I'm glad you raised that, because that's a classic example. So you used in that the example of Brexit. The two things I would say. Firstly,
and see, because they went down this, it's just the thing about Brexit line. Suddenly, like, you can just be completely blown away as Ramona hysteria, right? Like, come on, they just, oh god. Byline TV, if you're watching, like, you had a golden opportunity to hold somebody who works for the worst institution on the planet. I'd say that they're not. I mean, they're not exactly, I don't know, the Taliban, but one of the worst media institutions in the country, right? To hold them to task, you've just given them huge numbers of freebies to just completely disregard everything that you say, to try to form a counteractive narrative, right? Because all you've done is essentially give them a conspiracy theory that you can completely ignore here, right? God. Next time you have a debate, invite me. I'm a TikToker. I don't have 100,000 followers or anything, but I am on TikTok with a non-zero amount of engagement, and I'll happily debate somebody from right-wing press about manufactured consent. I've read some Chomsky and Herman. I'll be very good, I promise.
The Daily Mail, you said my paper. The Daily Mail advocated a vote for Brexit. The Mail on Sunday, and I was writing for it at the time, advocated for Remain. So again, it doesn't quite fit with this idea that there is this very specific line that is handed down from above.
There you go. Exactly. It's super easy to critique their incredibly poor understanding of the situation, because as soon as you find something that doesn't quite fit into that, it's true. Like, other newspapers within the whole kind of media landscape they're trying to critique as the right-wing media didn't back Brexit in the same way, but they all of them unilaterally back neoliberal economic reforms.
In relation to the broader issue, though, because like I said, I think you do touch on something. You're absolutely right. The Mail, the Daily Mail, Mail on Sunday, have focused a lot on the issue of immigration. Now, that is an issue which the liberal media, for years, indeed decades, refused to focus on. And it was one of the biggest failings that we've seen in the liberal media over the last few decades. And I include myself in this, because I was advocating a very pro immigration line at the time, both when I was writing at the Telegraph and also when I was writing at the Mail. Those of us who were writing that believed complacently what we were writing, and we believed the liberal consensus, which is the debate about immigration.
I mean, you don't have to. It's just there's no ideological consensus about this. There's just evidence-based reality of this, right? In that we now know from you huge amounts of research about how immigration works, and that it's just a net positive, right? Especially when you have declining birth rates. Like, I'm sorry, like the reserve army of labour theory has been proven untrue through plenty of systemic, actual, not just systemic analysis, but actual empirical analysis, and and real world studies of what's happened because of immigration, right? Population has to go up. We live in the infinite growth society, right? We live in consumer capitalist economic system, which thrives and relies on continuous overall growth. Like, we're looking at a potential recession right now, and a long recession at that, like 18 months, I think it's been predicted as. And this is like a theoretical disaster for the economy. And so population degrowth is a complete antithesis of that. So in a world in which we're having declining birth rates in the UK, we're going to need to have further immigration to be able to increase that. And that was what, I guess, the increase in immigration and population size was one of the reasons we had a pretty boom economy under the Blair administration. The issue is that you have to make sure that enough of the money that comes from the economic growth goes into maintaining public services to be able to continue to increase them, to deal with the demand from an increasing population. Now, that's not happened under the Conservative government. It didn't happen as much under New Labour either, because they didn't change the neoliberal economic consensus. And that's why a lot of public services have failed, and why immigration is an easy candidate to blame, rather than the stratification of money in the economy, which previously in the social democratic kind of consensus period, pre the neoliberal forms of Thatcher, would have been able to deal with much better than it does now, because we've continued seeing drops in funding on the NHS, and all of this kind of stuff, the over-marketisation of housing, the lack of housing construction, or none of this has met the needs of an increasing population, regardless of whether that's an immigrants coming into the UK, or whether it's some kind of growth boom in births of the natural population. Regardless of where that comes from, the infrastructure has not been looked after properly by either of the neoliberal parties at this point, and a return to a social democratic consensus is the only solution. Kicking out the immigrants, all that will do is kill our economic growth, right? Unless you want to change to like degrowth communism overnight, which I'm sure nobody on this panel would like to be able to do. You're never gonna make immigration unnecessary, right?
Immigration was perceived as an unalloyed good. Anybody who claimed it wasn't was a racist. Anybody who reported anything in relation to immigration was stirring up racism. And then Brexit happened, and we didn't know what happened because we didn't see it coming. So none of us on the Liberal side of the debate saw it.
Hang on a minute. The immigration thing was going through the entirety of the New Labour period, right? If one thing that was good about New Labour was the fact that they did help lower immigration requirements so that we could get in a higher population to continue that growth cycle, right? Because it doesn't depress people's wages, as I said. Reserve Army of Labour isn't actually true in that case with regards to immigration. We wouldn't have had the incredible growth that we saw during the kind of the New Labour period at that time, kind of riding the wave of the economic boom. But that was consistently through the entirety of this period. The right-wing press were talking about how bad Muslims were, trying to scare people about what was happening with regards to immigration at the time, and then that continued throughout the 2010s as well. Obviously, it changed from being about Muslims. It started being about people from Eastern Europe, right? Coming over here and mending things and fixing all the stuff we've broke. You can go watch the Stuart Lee sketch and the rise of UKIP, right? This was down to a right-wing media narrative about new immigration as a concept. And it wasn't run on the idea, it was run on the idea of them being an economic net negative, right? Them stealing people's jobs, them depressing wages or whatever, when neither of these things are actually true. But the actual driving factor was racism. People didn't want to see more black and brown faces coming into the UK because they didn't like the demographic change. And if you look at the Facebook groups, if you look at the discussion that's happening between people on the right, none of it is focused anymore on anything to do with the economic aspects that were touted by the press at the time. It's now all done around why am I seeing black faces in my adverts? Well, we've all seen the Mark Collett video about multiracial families in McCain oven chip adverts, and that's the kind of discourse that you get. This is nonsense.
And that's a classic example, as I was saying at the start of this, about why we desperately need the diversity we've got. We need newspapers which actually do honestly reflect, whether we like it or not, what huge swathes of British public opinion are thinking.
I don't think that's true. I think that you kind of influence the opinion of people.
Well, no,
very emotive headlines. No, that's very contentious.
True, 100%. Like Tansky is correct here, and that it is the narrative is being driven by the press, right? And as we've seen, I'm not showing the graph. I can find it on Twitter, but the actual graph that we've seen that shows the correlation between press coverage of immigration and people declaring immigration being an issue, it's almost they map onto each other, right? The narrative is being driven by the manufacturing consent on the part of the right-wing media, not the other way around.
Headlines and patronising headlines.
That's another discussion I think we need to have, because I mean you've just been patronising. What I think is patronising is this idea that somehow I and my colleagues somehow dictate what people in parts of the various parts of the country think. So that people. So what you're saying.
Why do you do it otherwise? Why do you put these stories out?
What else is there?
Not to inform and influence.
Not even wiki, like as you say, the edge.
Again, you can't have this discussion with him because he can just say, Oh, well, I just disagree. Do you think the people are idiots, that they just lap up everything we say verbatim, when we obviously know that they do? Because you can't say this without understanding the underlying incentive structures. As I've said 1,000 times whilst watching this video, if you don't say, well, you create these narratives because it serves your financial interests as a company driven by private profit, you have to do things that are within you, which are within the needs, which are within the the incentive structure for your shareholders, right? If you don't make your shareholders more money, you're not doing your job. You're not meeting your fiduciary responsibility as a publicly traded company, right? It is entirely within your remit to your shareholders to continue driving profit. And if manufacturing a narrative that increases that is what you need to do, you're going to have to do that. And if the CEO stopped doing that, he would get fired, or she would get fired.
That's information.
No, of course we attempt to. No, of course we attempt to inform and influence. But the point is,
with misinformation a lot of the time.
No, not with misinformation.
Well, why then have the Mail been sanctioned more times than any other title by IPSO then?
Well, the point is, can we just, but hang on a second.
For that very problem, for being generally unreliable and spreading misinformation. That's the quotes.
From?
That was from an article about Wikipedia also refusing to allow citations to the Daily Mail.
Okay, well, if you want to use Wikipedia as the...
I'm not using Wikipedia, that's an article about Wikipedia.
Yeah, but that's based on what Wikipedia did. But anyway, let's go.
Well, there's a difference between saying Wikipedia to Wikimedia Commons. Like, so Wikimedia Commons is the actual governing body, as far as I'm aware, that decided that the Daily Mail was too unreliable to use as a source, right?
But no, I think actually this is the fundamental point. Your argument is in particular in relation to an issue such as immigration, that if it wasn't for us...
And also, if you're going to say that, oh, well, why would you use Wikipedia? Like, and I was just like, well, hang on a minute. Surely the one person who would want to continue to have your right-wing platform notified would be Jimmy Wales, a literal Randian objectivist, and even he doesn't want your stories on them because they're so patently false, right? It's not deliberate kind of liberal media bastard kind of demonization of the Mail as a kind of journalistic entity. It is just because otherwise, why would Jimmy Wales be doing that? It's just clear that you're just continually peddling misinformation and lies, like literally straight up lying. These little liars.
If it wasn't for the Mail specifically, if it wasn't for the right-wing press in general, people's perceptions about immigration would be markedly different. Mm-hmm. Now,
it's been seeded for years regarding the EU, and it's not just the Mail. It's not just the Mail. In to be fair, it's broad swathes. It's the Sun. It's the Spectator to some extent. The Mail.
What you're saying.
Fine.
Yeah. What you're saying is the people around the country who vote for Brexit, people around the country who at the last election in these constituencies where they'd never voted Conservative before vote for Boris Johnson, they all did so because they were somehow brainwashed.
Not just by the papers. There was misinformation.
By the papers, brainwashed by misinformation.
Mind you,
papers.
like at this
and
point,
that you and others on the Liberal left are uniquely able to see through this disinformation, but for some reason they can't.
I mean, Brexit wasn't really just. It was. I mean, there was a lot. Kind of a big confluence of stuff surrounding Brexit. Some of it obviously was an issue with immigration. Some of it was issue with media lies, and some of it was also just an issue with a kind of unlistening political class. And there was an opportunity with which to be able to have a dissenting opinion. And they took that dissenting opinion because the entire political class, the ones that they couldn't trust across the entirety of the political class outside of UKIP, all said remain, and they all decided to shoot, and they all wanted to say leave instead, right? But the idea that it was somehow rich businessmen on one side who really wanted Brexit and they controlled the paper to do that versus just the normal intelligentsia who thought that Brexit was bad on some kind of material reason. So it was just business versus business, right? Some businesses benefited from Brexit and some of them didn't, and that was where most of the editorial lines came from, where the kind of political lines came from and the political allegiances came from. So the idea that it was just a right-wing press on one side, I think that's disingenuous.
It's the sheer volume of it. It wasn't.
That is, and with respect, this is why. But with respect, in a more broader point, this is why the Liberal left, certainly at a political level, keeps losing, because you guys generally believe that. You guys generally believe that.
It's not a case of being out of touch with the narrative. It's the fact that the weight of the narrative pushed by those papers is so strong, and it comes from all directions. And then you add on to that the immense amount of bots and memes that are being put out on Facebook, millions of pounds being put into that.
You might scoff at the idea of her claiming that memes are something that drive political discourse, but that's literally what the Trump campaign did. The Trump campaign used hyper-specific advertising on Facebook, which was used to create essentially kind of echo chambers within echo chambers on social media to try and move people in the direction of voting for Donald Trump. And it's really interesting Atlantic article about it. and the way in which that they explicitly used social media to try and create these this narrative amongst people. It's really interesting. About It's worth reading the article at the very least. And also, that's what the Corbyn campaign did in 2017. So they had an excellent social media campaign, which less reliant on memes, but still really good social media campaign in 2017. You significantly increased people's positive perceptions of Corbyn, especially at the time. That's why how else you managed to think they managed to gain new 20 percentage points between their polling at the start of the electoral cycle and their actual vote in the 2017 election.
Went out of any of the sort of big metropolitan conurbations in Britain, went into towns, villages, etc., you would find views in relation to immigration much more strongly conservative, small c conservative.
And where did they come from?
Than you would find in any.
I think, to be fair, I think some of it just isn't as much driven by the media as they're claiming it is. I think just a lot of people in the UK just are racist, right? They're not being made racist by the press necessarily, but they just don't want to see brown people around. I just think that's just the case, right? And not just in Britain. I think we do pretty well with regards to racism in some respects. Obviously, it's never the least racist country in Europe is still racist, in the words of Dave. But I just think that's just people just are just a little more racist than we like to think that they are. But certainly other narratives does help spark the hysteria and make it a political nexus around discussion, rather than trying to shift people's specific viewpoints or their specific biases. What it does do is shape the cultural narrative and become, as I said, the focal point of political discussion, rather than so it gets more coverage than it necessarily needs to through the narratives that are driven by media establishments around that. I think that's more kind of the point that I would go with regards to that. So yeah.
Where it comes from is from people's, to use one of the phrases, comes from people's lived experiences. It doesn't come from brainwashing by the newspaper.
You have people being vox popped in the streets, ask their thoughts about migration, ask their thoughts about Brexit, and they literally regurgitate words that are spun out from the Express, spun out from the Daily Mail. But also, don't make out that we're not some esoteric group that think, well, we get it because we're clever and we read the Guardian. That's not what it is. There is a huge swathe of people who rightly trust their newspapers to deliver the news. They aren't from a new generation of people.
And also, the interesting thing is that most of these anti-immigration points come from places where there isn't actually a particularly large cohort of immigrants that are there. You look at heavy population centres, big cities, Manchester, Birmingham, Leeds, Liverpool, all of these kind of places where there's, especially London, where there's an incredibly large ethnic minority population, right? Like, much larger percentage-wise than any other place in the country, really. I mean, you compare it to, kind of suburban areas or whatever, or villages and towns, market towns in, like, the northwest or whatever. And, especially, unless you're looking at somewhere like, I don't know, Bradford, where the percentage of ethnic minorities is way lower than it is in London, and people have much more positive views of immigration within London than they do elsewhere. It's explicit the scare campaigns of what could happen. Your city could become like London, and those things are driven sometimes by innate racism, but also exacerbated by narratives that are framed within the right-wing media. This idea that people's lived experiences of hanging around brown people are making them more racist because immigration is out of control, that's nonsense, because then you'd see it more in the places with more immigrants, and the actual opposite is true.
Perhaps, so they look at the newspaper, the paper that their parents read, that their grandpa, their auntie reads, and they go, that's where we got the news. And they trust it. And you have a duty to report and give balance, and you don't. And you have a duty to these people who believe you, who pay for your paper, to report the truth. And you don't, time and time and time again.
But as I said, this is the fundamental problem. Papers like the Mail and other papers on what you would call sort of the right-wing press have consistently reported facts in relation to immigration, and consistently reported and accurately reported what the public's grown reaction to that was. Now, the lies...
Just because there are some facts in there doesn't...
Just because there are some facts
No. There are facts. I cannot doubt that sometimes the Daily Mail reports truth. My goodness, of course they do. But you do not. You are evading the point that so often.
It's also important to understand that you can report factually whilst also still running the narrative, right? You can lie incredibly well with facts. United States, right? More white people get shot by the police than black people. That was the stat that they used, right? Which would make you think that the problem is worse amongst for white people getting shot by the police. But when you look at it as a percentage of the total population, when you weight it by the amount of black people and white people there are, a larger proportion of the black population are victims of police brutality than white people. And that is the issue, right? Because if you just do it by physical numbers, if there's way more white people, then of course that's going to happen more often. It's like when you look at things like overall emissions and you say, oh, well, China are way worse for emissions than, say, the United States, for example. But that's because they have 1.5 billion people. Of course they're going to have more emissions. But if you do it per capita, the United States has double the emissions of China. And it's just a conveniently misattributed fact to try and change people's perceptions without explicitly lying. Very clever.
The Daily Mail does not report fact.
No,
a lot of it's opinion dressed up as fact, let's put it that way. And a lot of people, like the issues with immigration, I mean, I feel that that's been seeded and for a long time. Johnson started the issues with the EU.
Of course you
and
feel
who benefits from Britain leaving the EU, but the non-dom?
With respect, of course you feel it has been seeded, and you have to feel it's been seeded.
It's not a case of feeling, it's a case of seeing it seeded.
If you can't create the narrative and actually get people and believe yourself the narrative that conservative views in relation to immigration are the product of the evil conservative press, what do you have to do? You have to constantly, the liberal left at that point has to constantly reassess its worldview, and that is one thing the liberal left just steadfastly refuses to do.
Kind of like the clumping of things, because things, again, they don't exist in a vacuum.
What worldview does he think that we have, other than an evidence-based one? Obviously, I'm not a liberal left, I'm a socialist, right? But, what view, I mean, at least both the liberal left and then parts of the socialist left at least do agree, at least, that there's an evidence base for showing the economic benefits of immigration, at least, right? Maybe we can have a discussion about the economic versus cultural impact of immigration as a policy. But the problem is that the right-wing view of this just isn't based in reality. If it was based in reality, then you would never be able to go down the economic benefit route, because it's just not true. So they have to go through the cultural narrative, which mostly just stems from racism. Come on.
Exist in these groups. It's just simply a fact of that the headlines are not. Look at what happened, for example, when Johnson, after essentially getting to the point of having almost a bloody siege in Number 10. Look at the Daily Mail headline.
What have we done?
What have we done? Or there's a war on when you're trying to talk about. I mean, and the article just the other day about Johnson, for goodness sake, it was saccharine. It was dripping in bias.
It's incredibly frustrating as well how much of this is focused on Boris Johnson specifically as a character, rather than, again, narrativization, right? Because Dan really wants to talk about narrativization. He's defending himself very well because the attack line is so weak.
Background, let's stick to what we were talking about, which is the
That is what we're talking about. For once, it would be nice to have a question answered, because...
Well, in relation to the issue of the investigation into Boris Johnson, what a number of people have said is, if we're going to have the investigation, should the investigation be conducted by people who have already prejudged the outcome of the investigation by saying Boris Johnson is already a liar and is already guilty? Now, and have also pointed out that Chris Bryant recused himself from being chair of that committee for precisely that reason. Now, some people think that as a result of that, this is in some way a kangaroo court.
Oh, my goodness.
Hang on, people, I know you don't agree with it, but again, unfortunately, you are going to be subjected to opinions you don't agree with. That's an opinion that's been put forward. But equally,
the issue isn't about whether or not somebody agrees or disagrees with the opinion. It's about whether or not the opinion has any empirical basis. That's whether we judge whether an opinion is worth listening to or not whether or not it agrees with our existing priors. Now, people who do explicitly only take into account viewpoints whether or not they're explicit with it, whether or not it connects with their existing ideological bias, that is bad, right? Their existing that is the bad. People who only listen to their existing bias, that is a bad thing, right? But the issue is that a lot of the opinions that people are like, oh, why don't you take my opinion into account? And look, it's not based in empirical fact, unfortunately. And that is at least the kind of the bare minimum that we'll expect from an opinion that I actually want to take seriously.
It's very difficult to find people on that committee who don't think that, because he, by his own admission, has done it.
It's just everyone's seen it happen. He's openly lied in the House of Commons. So who's not going to have seen that?
So exactly. So again, what you're saying is, it is quite clear that he's guilty we need the investigation. Some people are saying, well, maybe we need to ensure that the investigation is carried out in a way that isn't prejudged. But the other point I was going to make is, again, coming back to the diversity that you will see in the Mail, which you won't see in other titles, I disagree with that. I write for the Mail, I disagree with it, and I've said it, I've said it publicly.
You would, wouldn't you?
In relation,
I mean...
and again, this is the other problem, with respect to you said. So you're right, there was an article that was published yesterday, I think by Richard Littlejohn, in which Richard Littlejohn said that the FBI have completely messed up in relation to the raid on Trump. Firstly, and I say this as someone, I don't think there's been anyone who's been more critical of Donald Trump than me. I mean, I've literally described the man as a fascist.
Sometimes you get it right, Dan.
Thank you.
Sometimes you do, yeah, to be fair.
I actually am very, very concerned about what the broader political implications of what the FBI did, and the FBI better get this right. And all these people who are wandering around saying, oh, of course the FBI got it right, they wouldn't do anything that's daft as that. Remember what they did to Hillary Clinton. If it wasn't for the FBI being daft, Donald Trump wouldn't have been president in the first place. But going back to the point we're discussing, the media, that is an article written by an individual commentator in the Mail. Now, that is what we need. We need this. We need people in our media who write things that lots of people are going to disagree with, lots of people are going to get angry about, and lots of people are going to debate.
That
is what a free media is.
I think we're not going to agree. It's been a really good chat. I think part of it for me, I just want to...
I mean, I've not read that specific article, so I can't really comment specifically. I know I've not even really followed much of the FBI stuff. I mean, like, if it turns out they had nuclear codes in his basement, that's bad. There was a legal video I was halfway through watching before I started stream, which seemed to imply that what happened was that what Trump was concealing was bad, but I'm not sure whether it's been bungled specifically. I can't comment on that. But the issue really isn't about whether there's one individual article that you can point out. It's an overall narrativization, an editorial line that tries to, again, engender certain narratives and certain opinions. I think that's the issue here, really, rather than whether or not Richard Littlejohn did one good article about Boris Johnson or not. Like, come on.
Something we've touched upon is I really struggle with the fact that you've got these people that are very closely in bed, if you like. The Harry Coles, Dan, I would put you in that bracket. Laura Kuenssberg, when she was there, who was so close to the government, who act as, in my mind, they just repeat what they are told. It's always an anonymous government source
Unfiltered,
has said.
yeah.
Now, my understanding of a journalist from when I was a kid is that if someone tells you it's raining and the other person tells you it's sunny, I don't want you to tell me that. I want you to stick your head out the window as a journalist, find out for yourself and tell me. And that is the lack of value that we are getting from our journalists. And I find the right-wing media is just repeating the propaganda that is given to its select journalists and steering the narrative in a way that has become so divisive.
Again, it's just bad people in charge. No understanding of the material conditions that's led to this. Just that you're bad because you're with the bad people and the bad people are in charge, and that's where the issue stems from. And it's nothing about the profit motive or the incentives of private establishments. None of that ever comes into the conversation, and all it's about is just whether or not the bad people are in charge. Oh God, I hate liberals. Obviously, I hate conservatives more, but I just cannot stand. Oh God, liberals just drive me round the fucking bend with the inability to properly materially analyse situations. And it was just so easy for Dan to wriggle out of it. Like, Dan easily won this debate, right? It was very clear. Like, there's Marina Perkis has flashcards and Tansky has a notebook, right? And they're just delivering pre-prepared points, and Dan is able to kind of pretty effortlessly combat them off the cuff with no notes whatsoever. Like, it's very clear that he's won this debate. And he shouldn't do, because he's wrong, 100% incorrect. And all the stuff he said that was wrong, right? But his interlocutors were just so inept at drilling down to the heart of the issue, it was very easy for him to deflect from their points.
And a scene, sadly, it's culminated in sadly where we are now. What did you guys think at home? Did anyone change your mind? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see more like this from Byline TV. And you can also get involved by becoming a member at byline.tv/join. If you sign up, you'll be supporting Byline TV, and you'll get access to loads of perks too, like deciding what topics you want to see on the table and telling us what questions you want to see the panel answer. There are also hours and hours of exclusives like extended content, live Q&As, and the chance to talk directly to the producers of Byline TV. Just go to byline.tv/join to become a member, and thank you again for watching, and we will see you again next week at the table.
Now, I will let them get the little bit of advertising. I have, after all, stolen their content, repurposed it for my own usage. But then it's really important to understand the points of view of these people to see where the deficiencies, especially in their ability to debate, comes from. It's frustrating that we didn't hear much from Tansky in that. Really, Marina Perkis kind of led a lot of the questioning, which again, first of all, meant that it was 2-on-1 when she's supposed to be a kind of neutral moderator, I guess. And second of all, is that I know this was supposed to be the Tansky segment. It says Dan Hodges versus Super Tansky debates in the title. Yeah, it was really just kind of Marina Perkis versus Dan Hodges, which is sad because it could have been more interesting, I think. It would also been more interesting if I was debating because I've been better. But yeah, an absolute crash course on why liberals are just incapable of analysing politics, and why it's all like so many positions that they just kind of arrived to just kind of by accident, really, not by intuiting, not by analysing material, not even empirically, just having some kind of feeling, understanding that there are inaccuracies in other people's reporting and other people's understanding of this issue, and then taking it as read that somehow makes their point, that somehow validates their point of view, rather than properly empirically looking into their own points of view, right? By materializing situations that allow them to critique other people that they disagree with, and then you just end up with them, essentially being able to be easily refuted by the new people that they're trying to debate with, and they find it so difficult to change people's minds, right? Again, this is why we end up in the situation we're in, well, especially that they would have decried, right? They would have decried, like, the kind of, the move towards quote unquote populism in 2017, and especially 2019. This ham-fisted ability for them to try and equate the far-right politics of the Conservative Party with, the social democratic politics of Jeremy Corbyn, like how somehow this is just populism on both sides rather than two completely different political philosophies, but it allows them to completely disregard anybody they see as being too radical, because anything outside their kind of pretty small kind of liberal Overton window bubble as being outside of the acceptable realm of discourse, which I find very frustrating, and their inability to be able to properly articulate how they've managed to arrive at their particular worldview and their ideology, as Dan Hodges has correctly identified here, has meant more people drifting away from their point of view, both leftwards and rightwards. Obviously, only one of those I would say is the correct point of view, but they're not both. Myself and Dan are not wrong in our ability to be able to understand this. Of course, Dan is wrong in saying that the press isn't biased, because it absolutely is. We have to look at the monetary incentives involved, not just this is because the bad men are in charge, which again, that's all we got. That's all we got from the liberals in this discussion. Were just, these papers are bad and lying because bad people do the bad things, and not because it's within their interests to do the bad things. And that's where this whole thing fell apart. Yes, gutless, as you said, God, that's very, very true. If you're watching and you enjoyed this segment, you can like and comment and subscribe. Future YouTube viewers, because I will almost certainly upload this to YouTube to try and steal the algorithmic advantage of Byline TV and the 3 participants for my own incredibly snide desires, because hopefully I'll be monetized by then and I can make extra profit off of their content, which is great because I'm a thief. You can also click the bell that will notify you when I go live, and if you're watching or on Twitch or watching this feature on YouTube and you want to give me money without donating on Patreon, you can subscribe on Twitch, get access to my handy emotes, and not feel bad about the fact that you are watching my content for free. Anyway, if you did enjoy that, please do follow my socials. They're on there, and I'll catch you on the next one.